I ended up going to college when I was 13. So then I'm in college.
How did I never know
That's
that?
a whole different thing. But when I was in, but I started in broadcast journalism.
How many people call you Doogie Howser?
A lot of them. It was the late 90s, early 2000s. So I got called Doogie Howser a lot. I got called Urkel the other 50% of the time.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do? I'd like to know the things that specifically make you.
Hey, I'm Tim Barnes. You are the genre. And in each episode, I ask someone about the first genres that inspired them, the first crafts they pursued, and how they feel about those pursuits now. I've got a few shows coming up in New York. I'm defending Coffee at Uptown Showdown at Symphony Space, February 29th at 8 p.m., and I'm telling a story at the Story Collider March 7th, 7:30 p.m. at Pier 57. This time on You Are the Genre, I'm highlighting my interview with Greg Iwinski, and those deep in the lore of the Tim Barnes-averse already know that I co-host a Star Wars podcast with him and Jim Fagan called Yub Nub, which is fitting because outside of writing for shows like The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and Game Theory with Bomani Jones, he's also currently writing for the animated series Young Jedi Adventures. Greg has a passion for comedy and politics, which came in handy during last year's writer's strikes, where he functioned as both a WGA East council member and a co-creator of the informative late-night style YouTube series Contract TK. We spoke at the end of 2023. Now, I want to find out who you are, Greg. Even though we co-host a Star Wars podcast together, the number of hours we've spent talking about one movie franchise, one genre specifically.
Literally hundreds of hours. Over 200 hours of our lives.
Truly, truly baffling. But we're here recording in the last month of 2023 after a tumultuous year in the industry where there were multiple strikes. And I'm excited to talk to you both about your own career and your own path towards a hopeful discovery of your own personal genre and how you bring Greg Iwinski energy to everything that you do, but also to talk about the state of media as a whole right now, as we're trying to get a sense of where all these shifts are landing in 2024. And that's why I started this, because I'm just excited and interested in the blending of genres that are happening and figuring out how people are navigating the testy waters. For me, that is by just being like, okay, I've got a lot of different interests. Whatever TV is, the media landscape has a lot of different interests. As long as I'm being true to myself, I'm okay with exploring all these different things. The first major question is, what was the first genre that you were drawn to? What was the first big amorphous thing that was like, I'm interested in this. I'm excited about this.
My childhood is so mushy and my memory is so bad, it's always hard to nail things down in the right order. But I know that as a kid, I was obsessed with the radio. And so that's more of a medium, I guess, than a genre. But, you know, there were these like kid plays that my parents would get for me that would be on the radio, you know, especially because it was the 90s. So it's like the Christian Adventures in Odyssey half-hour things, or like listen to those. And, you know, we were listening to the radio all the time. So a lot of NPR and a lot of obviously talk radio growing up in Arizona. But the idea of the radio, I mean, I think of listening to Prairie Home Companion and Car Talk and all the NPR stuff on the weekends, and to sports talk radio, which, I mean, I love basketball, but I grew up listening to basketball on KTAR 620 AM. And it was the radio as a medium to me was, you know, even in the 80s, 90s, still out of step. It wasn't like a bunch of kids were like, I love the radio.
Yeah.
But I loved it because of the imagination and the involvement, but also because so many different things were coming out of this box. And I was hearing so many different kinds of performers, and sports talk really excited me. Talk radio really excited me. The idea of we're all going to talk about something, I'm going to talk about something, and then you're going to call and we're going to have a conversation. And then I'm going to talk to someone else and we're going to have this rolling conversation. I think it's a lot different now. And I think both on television and radio, it's much more gimmicked and gamified. And you've got, you know, even in sports, you have the commentators that, you know, are just waiting for a headline to be contrarian to get people to call in. You know, it's kind of like reality TV. When it was organic, it was really interesting and fun. And the more that the people jump into it as professional performers for what the genre was organically, you lose something original, and then it becomes kind of a pantomime of itself. And there's still reality TV that's very entertaining to people, and there's talk radio that's entertaining, but it's not, we can't admit that like what we're doing now is the same as the real world. You know, even like the Jim Rome show was a sports show where I didn't realize this at the time, but a bunch of people who listened to Jim Rome were comedy writers, because the way the calls worked was that you had to, it's like have a take and don't suck were the two rules. And you went on, and it was, he wouldn't interrupt you. So you'd come on with like a 30 to 60 second monologue, just about ripping something, doing something, whatever. And that would be your take. And at the end, he would either be like, that was good. And, or like and if it was really good, he'd be like, rack 'em, which is like, keep it in the digital rack and like save the call for later, you know, or you could get the buzzer where like he would hang up on you and there would be a loud buzzing sound and you would get buzzed off.
Interesting.
And I thought it was just like sports fans. And what I found out later was it was a lot of people like you and I, except just a different generation, who were bored at work at their day jobs and were writing these sports monos, and they were calling in and doing them. And he would try to throw you off. He'd like interrupt you and see if you repeated the exact line, like you, because you weren't supposed to be reading it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And especially growing up in Arizona, this is going on a million tangents, but growing up in Arizona, you're in the car all the time. You drive everywhere. You drive all the time. And I drove across town to see friends and drove for working for my dad. And so you're in the car so much that like I would hear this all day. You know, it's on 3 hours a day and you're driving around in the afternoon. And it's like, okay, the pattern of that and of talking about Suns talk. I mean, I was probably 10 or 11 years old when I kept calling into KTAR so much for the sports show. And they would be like, are you like a little kid? And I would be like, yeah, I'm a little kid, but I want to talk about the Suns.
Oh my goodness. This audio must be out there somewhere.
Somewhere out there. Yeah. And they loved it. Like Brad Sesmat, that was his name. He was the host of one of the shows, and like Michael Dixon and all these guys. But I eventually got invited with my family to come to the radio station and watch them tape part of the show. And it was like one of the highlights of my life as a little kid. We drove to downtown Phoenix. My whole family went. And I got to say hi to everybody. It was so cool. And it was like, and then you're sitting there watching them do a radio show live. And that was for me. I mean, this for me was before television, before sketch, before any of that. It was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And that was so core to me. And what I loved about it though was the idea of like the person sitting there as the host has ideas about what's happening. And those ideas have to be interesting enough for other people to not only listen to them, but to want to talk through them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that ends up being so many other things I've made for the rest of my life have been basically coming back to that, which is a really good radio host that isn't just a shock jock and isn't just whatever, is someone who you turn it on because you know that whatever's in the news, they're going to be talking about it. And they're going to have a point of view, and that point of view is going to be interesting and different and engaging enough that maybe you agree with them and you're going to hear people call in with arguments you don't like and you're going to get to hear them proved wrong. Or maybe you don't agree with them and people are going to call in and you're going to go, yeah, they're right, you know, or you're going to call in because you're so frustrated. But that's not very far away from late night comedy.
Yeah, it really isn't.
Especially now in the political age. You're doing pretty much the same thing.
Well, I'm fascinated because you're talking about radio as a medium, and I'm thinking about how when we were growing up, I think you might be a little older than me, but we still are of this generation where the transition of things was taking place. Like, I feel so honored in a way to know that I'm a part of this generation that experienced the time before the internet was in everyone's home and Facebook existed, and the time after. And growing up in the time where it was insane to think of a TV inside of a car. And now TVs are in so many cars. But to go back to the time where the radio was the only entertainment medium in a vehicle outside of being able to play a tape or a CD is really interesting. Like, that's probably still the main place that people listen to the radio. I think less and less people have a separate object in their homes that, you know, gets information from the radio waves.
And what's crazy is even now, I think last year, 90% of Americans listen to the radio at least once. Like people are listening to the radio because I think you forget in New York how many people have cars, and you turn on the car and the radio's on, or everybody's at work. If you have a job that isn't just sitting in a cubicle, people have the radio on. I mean, I remember when Sirius and XM were different companies. There were two options you could get, but how crazy it was that they would say, we have 500 radio stations. And you just were like, what? Because growing up for me, we had Power 92, Power 92.3, number one for hip hop and R&B, which then became Power 98.7. I could go through all this, but but then you have 91.5 is NP. So you have an NPR station, you have a rap station, you have an oldie station, which back then was 50s and 60s and 70s oldie station.
You got a smooth jazz station.
You've got a smooth jazz. Yep. You've got smooth jazz. KJZZ. K-Jazz.
Yeah. Well, out in LA, it was 94.7 The Wave. That's the one.
Oh,
That's
the Wave is
greatest jingle.
The Wave is for real. But even when you're talking about the transition, it was an interesting transition because we had 103.9 The Zone, which was the Edge, and then I think it became The Zone, and the Edge was the alternative. So they played Eminem and Incubus and System of a Down and Blink-182 and Rancid and Sublime. And then 101.5 and 104.7 were the two like pop stations. But then 104.7 became Kiss FM. And back when that happened, you didn't realize like, oh, this is a giant media conglomerate that's then buying up all these local stations to make this national brand. But what happened was all of a sudden at like noon one day, they played Kiss by Prince. And then it started over when it was over. And then it started over again. And I went on Facebook and everybody's like, why is 104.7 only playing the same? They're not even taking commercial breaks. They're just playing Kiss. And and we didn't know because again, it's not a very internet age. And so they did that for 24 hours. And then at the end of the 24 hours, they're like, we're going to be Kiss FM now. And you were like, oh, I didn't know that could happen. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
And so I think the transition you're talking about is even now when you listen to the radio, I mean, so many of these stations are just kind of franchises of a global radio network that picks everything, as opposed to when, I mean, man, I remember like radio stations used to be local. They were so local. And so you would listen to like Edge 103.9 and you could call and talk to a real person, not Dead Air Dave or the DJ on the thing, but you could talk to his operator and be like, can you play this song? And then they would play the song, and they did a Sunday service. So like every Sunday morning they would play all acoustic punk. So it'd all be punk music, but it's only the acoustic versions. And like, just like it being so close and real. And then now you look back and it's so that's what radio used to be, because it used to beam. You had to be close enough to hear the radio station. I mean, you're from LA and when you drive on the 10 between Phoenix and LA, the radio stations tell a story. They tell how, because then all the Phoenix ones start to fade. Yeah. And then you get those
mariachi music in the background.
And that's the thing. I think people who aren't from where we're from don't know this, but one of the crazy things is the FCC wattage limits, meaning the power of your radio station, that does not apply in Mexico. So when you're close to Mexico, driving from Phoenix to LA, those stations blast the hell out of your radio. And it doesn't matter what you're supposed to be able to hear. You just hear that because they have that thing cranked up like a nuclear bomb of radio. So just every other station, you're like, oh, a different Mexican one, a different one, boom, boom. Yeah. And then you get into the middle, you get into like desert California, and there's like so many preaching stations. There's like 3 or 4 or 5 like Bible stations, not even Christian music, like preaching.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, okay, what's going on here? But it's telling you about where you are, what the radio stations are. Then you get country, and then you start to get to the edge of LA, and it's like you get the big ones show, the Ryan Seacrest is talking to you, and and stuff is popping up like that. Yeah, I love the radio. When I do road trips, I like road tripping with my family, but whenever we do road trips and I'm manning the radio, it's always the radio. It's not like Sirius. I do Sirius XM if it's like I'm listening to the news or whatever, but I love like just flipping the radio. I think it's really annoying to my family, but it's like because this is, if you're under 30 years old, none of this makes sense, but there is a seek button on a radio, and that button says, I'm going to keep going along the radio static until I find another station. And you just hit it you listen for maybe 2 seconds to understand what genre it is, and you go again, and you go again, and you go, and you're just flipping through stations, which I think probably is so annoying to my wife. But I'm just sitting there like, I'm like, nope, I'm going to come back around to this one. Nope.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I prefer the knob. I love hearing that like in between frequency, the chaos.
Yeah.
There's something like so fascinating about it. What I want to know is what was it specifically that drew you to these radio shows, these talk shows, these sports radio shows? It makes me wonder because for me, I was a pretty sheltered kid, grew up in South Central LA, wasn't allowed to go outside, and I watched a lot of TV. And over the years, I've realized that a lot of my social skills come from television hosts, specifically daytime television hosts like Regis Philbin. He is such a, like, me and my little sister would watch Regis and Kathy and Regis and Kelly so many mornings. And that is my idea of having fun at a party, is being the Regis of the party. Just kind of,
I think that's accurate.
In that.
I think you're right. I think if you're the Regis of the party, you are having a great time.
Yeah, exactly. So were you getting social cues from the radio? Like, were you using these radio hosts as like people to mimic? And can you track that through your social life?
Well, I mean, I was definitely learning a lot and embracing it because I was homeschooled. So I was, again, I was very socially cut off, other than like basketball teams and stuff like that. One of the big things, though, was the idea of preparedness, of professionalism, of understand. Well, I think what it was understanding when we're talking on the radio, this is not normal talking. You call into a radio station. I know what I'm going to say. I want to say this about Dan Marley got traded. I think it's bad because of this. We should have done this. You come on. I finally get through. The lady says, what do you want to talk about? I want to say Dan Marley trade's bad. Okay, cool. Go on hold. I'm listening to the show. Okay, we're going to put you on. Okay, all right, turn your radio down. Turn it down. Hearing it in my headphones. Then you hear the click. Greg from Goodyear. What do you want to say? That's not talking. That's performing. And it taught me so early that if I'm seeing you on a screen or hearing you in a speaker, it's not real. We are performing this. And if I want to perform and want to do this, I have to be ready. I'm not just walking up to a microphone and being like, oh, blah, blah, blah. That's what made it so real as a job to me too. It was like, oh, this is a real thing. It clicks on and off. You're on air, then you're off air. You have like all of it is tangible and real. And so that accessibility really opened up what I thought I could do. And so then, listening to all the fictional audio stuff I listened to, like Hitchhiker's Guide, the BBC dramatization of Hitchhiker's Guide, and listening to Lake Wobegon and all this stuff, and being like, oh, okay, you can talk for a living. And that's the part that came across that started shaping me, of going like, oh, I can talk for a living. And that led me to the first job I thought I was going to have, which was not actually a host. It was announcer. I thought I was going to go become a basketball announcer.
Really?
Yeah, I would, as a kid, we had the greatest basketball announcer in the history of basketball, Al McCoy, who just retired last year. He was, the best of the best of the best. And he was so good. And so what I would do, like learning and listening to him tell the story of a basketball game and the emotion and the detail, and like a thing that sports broadcasters do, the Suns are moving left to right on your radio dial. Like, that's not true if you're on the other side of the arena. But what they're saying is, you're sitting with me.
Oh, yeah.
We're here. And so
They're
when
the camera lens.
When you think of the game, they're going left to right, wearing the white uniforms with the purple trim. And you're like, oh, we're here.
That's interesting. I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah. So it's all this storytelling and bringing people in. It all mattered. And so I would sit there with an old cassette recorder. And let me tell you, kids, there's a lot of digital stuff. Buy a micro cassette recorder. They're expensive. They're hard. They haven't had a big comeback yet. They need to. But a micro cassette recorder, buy it and record things, and don't record over the tapes, and save them, because they are the best way to like remember ideas. And I have stuff from when I'm a kid. Like, I have stuff from my parents before I was born, of them recording messages to themselves. So I had a micro cassette recorder, and I had headphones. And this is back when televisions were old enough. They had a headphone jack on the television.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And I plugged the headphone jack into the TV, and I put one headphone over my ear, and then I have one headphone off my ear, and then I have my recorder, and I'm watching the game, and I'm listening to Al because he knows the names of everybody on the other team. And I'm doing play-by-play for a game that no one is ever going to hear. That the game is going to be over by the time I'm going to be done recording. But I would record myself doing game play-by-play as
There's
practice.
something there. I think we have a commonality. I don't have anything as specific as that, but there's something funny in retrospect and kind of having the bird's eye view of our childhoods, because me being someone who didn't have any friends in the neighborhood, I had friends at school and stuff, but I went to a school that wasn't immediately in my neighborhood. There's like these things that you do to entertain yourself that did you show these tapes to anybody, or this is just like an activity for yourself?
Yeah, it was just for me.
And I think that's why we both work in media, is because we had some element of socializing with these things projecting out to us in our living rooms or in our cars or whatever. We like this interaction with, feels weird to say the interaction with the machine, but like we like this interaction with this magical object that brings the world to us somehow. And the fact that you wanted to be a conductor of that, you wanted to be
yes. Yes.
And I don't personally enjoy a lot of sports. When I'm watching it live, it is pretty fun. But when I go to games and I don't hear the announcer, I'm just like, what are we doing here? like seriously.
Yeah.
And if you have nosebleed seats and they're so far away, it's really like, what are we doing here? And now in this modern world, like even at a concert or at an NBA game, when you're really far away and you realize you're here in a physical space with people, but you're all really just looking at a giant screen. Like at the Madison Square Garden, you're really just looking at a giant TV with a bunch of people.
Yeah, I go to a lot of sports games, but part of my it's not a rule, but if I am just going to be sitting far enough away to look at the screen, I don't go. So it's like, I'll go if I can sit close enough to watch the game. But I think what's funny is, if you go to a Yankees game now, even, what do the old men there do?
Yeah, they got their radio.
They bring a radio. Yep. They have a radio and they have earbuds, and they've got one earbud in and they're listening to the game they're watching.
And so you're building a case here that I've never really thought about, but we want the live event to in some way still be storytelling. We want someone there to give commentary in the middle of explaining what's happening, say some anecdote about this this athlete's life or whatever, and then maybe advertise a hot dog or something, who knows. But it is a bit of a campfire experience, it seems.
Especially if, because I think sporting events can be very communal, but at college football, playoff sports, there are season ticket holder sections where it's like there's a thing, when you all go to a game and everyone around me, we all know each other, then we're filling all those little moments with us talking about our lives or about the game or, this, like whatever, we're talking. But so often now with reselling, people moving around, you're just going to what games you can. You're there by yourself. You're there with only two people, and there isn't a communal aspect of that crowd like there should be. And that is where you're like, well, I need someone to be that voice to me if it's not going to be the people in my section, When I've gone to European soccer games, like especially in England, it's so communal because the tickets are cheap and the people that live there are the ones that go. So you sit there and everyone around is like, hey, you're in Jeff's seat. He's not here this week, but you're in his seat. And you're like, oh, okay. And then they're all like they all are all it's like church. It's like when people are reaching over the pews at church, like, hey, what's up with you? That's happening at the game. So then when they're all watching it, they're watching it as one. And I think in American sports, because of just ticket reselling and stuff, you're much more in a place where it's kind of a lot of individuals experiencing it on their own.
This is going to be a lot, because from Yup Nup, our Star Wars podcast, I like to get into an abstract space. It's going to be my last abstract question about sports, but what is the joy for you of being at a game close enough to watch the game in action, not on a giant screen? Like, where does the joy truly come from?
There's a couple things. One is, usually when you're that close, the crowd is really into it. And this is only if, are the people around me, do they like my team? And did we win? Because if that's true, that feels great, because it's great to be in your living room. Like my soccer team has won championships and I've been in my living room trying to not wake up my sleeping baby. And it's great they won, but it's not the same as when they win and you're in a crowded bar and people are like, Kansas basketball had the largest comeback in March Madness final ever. And at halftime, everyone in the bar is like so sad and talking about next year. And at the end, we're throwing beer at the ceiling and people are crying. And I'm taking pictures of everyone because they were born like 2 blocks from where I was born, and you're all like screaming. That experience, it's the potential of that high that's so good at the big games. But the other thing is, when it's a sport that you love, like I love basketball. I've watched basketball my whole life. My dad got me into basketball. I played for 10 years. My wife and I both watch. Like ball is life. It's a huge part of our lives. And we'll watch basketball. We'll watch 2-3 games, flip around. We'll watch it all the time. But when you go in person, you're seeing what's really happening. So you are losing the narration of an announcer, but you're also losing all the director's choices of where we're focusing. So now I'm watching that guy who isn't getting the ball and his body language. And when he goes to the bench, he's kind of upset, or this ref is arguing with them when they go to commercial, or this thing is, you're seeing everything. And so teams that I like, I end up liking my hometown team a lot better after I've seen them play in person that year. Because on TV, it's like, well, they're telling me this, they're showing me this, they're throwing up stats, they're building a narrative, which is fine. But when I go, I'm like, I think that guy sucks. Oh, I got to see him play for 10 minutes in real life. He's actually pretty good. They're not giving the ball. Or this happened here.
Wow.
And you're seeing that. So like the Suns and Knicks played a couple weeks ago in New York, and I'm a Suns fan. And they played, and a friend had really good tickets. And so we went to the game, like 5 Arizonans went to the game, surrounded by Knicks fans. Because you're down there, And so it's all these Knicks fans and like celebrities, and that's the part of the problem the Knicks have is like, there's like people who are there to be seen at the game, not like the Lakers, but like still, there's still a lot of famouses there. And we're there, and the game is tense the whole game, and we're cheering, and it's great, and whatever. And then it's tied with 5 seconds left, and I look at my friend, and I'm like, Devin Booker game winner, and they're like, okay. And one friend had the phone out to record, and the rest of us are watching. And so I'm watching in this arena, whatever. And I'm looking at my team in the timeout, and I'm like, these are my guys. This is my hometown. I love this team. I've loved them my entire life. And they come out, and he gets the ball and runs around the court and shoots a 3, and it goes in at the end of the game. And we went insane. We're all jumping up and hugging each other, and everyone around us is angry. But we're doing like we're jumping. Oh my gosh, he did it. And I'm yelling to the Suns announcer, who turns back and is like, yeah, because he sees a bunch of Suns fans behind him. And it's like, oh, we're all here experiencing. Like even then, it's that micro community. Like I'll remember that for the rest of my life. And if I watch it on TV, it would have been like, cool, that was cool. But I was there, and you're like, oh my gosh, that the thrill and the misery are so worth it. I think, because so many times things can become rote, and sports can become like that too. And, life doesn't, I don't want my life to have the highs and lows of sports. I want my life to be pretty solid, but sports lets me have crushing lows. When the Suns blew the finals, they were up 2-0, and then they lost 4 games in a row. And I was in bed for the last game. I didn't watch it. I had the lights off. I was in bed in the dark. And my dad called me at the end of the game and was like, that was pretty bad. And I was like, yep. And then like the next 2 days, I was legitimately depressed. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to do anything because of the basketball team. And then when they win games like that, I'm like, this is the best night of my life. So yeah, that's what I love about sports is it manipulates my emotions, and I want that to happen.
Yeah, and there's a consistency to it. The schedule. To me, it feels like if you just replace a couple of words, you're kind of talking about the theater. And it's making me realize that before the advent of television and radio, sports journalists were no different than theater critics. You go see, like, people who weren't there are relying on thousands of different permutations of stories from the people who were there.
And you're telling them how good the show was, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And sports is like theater if you didn't know when you went in if it was going to be a comedy or tragedy. They're like, we're going to do a play for you. You'll find out if you're happy or sad at the end.
This podcast is brought to you by Sports Commentary for Theater. Go to...
With the ad lib from downtown.
So you had this passion for being a sports announcer. Did this passion fade? Like, how did that evolve into your pursuit of a life in comedy?
It didn't fade. I would still go become a team's sports announcer in a second. I would do a single game. If any league out there wants to do a funny joke where I'll find another really good comedian announcer. If you want some Emmy-winning comedy, I'll do a Manning cast, an alternate broadcast of an NBA game. Let us do it at NBA. Make it happen. But I've always still loved that. I think what happened was I started doing other things. So I got I ended up going to college when I was 13. So then I'm in college.
How did I never know
That's
that?
a whole different thing. But when I was in, I started in broadcast journalism.
How many people call you Doogie Howser?
A lot of them. It was the late 90s, early 2000s. So I got called Doogie Howser a lot. I got called Urkel the other 50% of the time. But I was there, and that was my first major, was broadcast journalism. So I was taking school classes on it. I was,
as a 13-year-old.
Yes.
Okay, Craig. I'm sorry, you really just flabbergasted me here. Like, this is...
I mean, you got to take your core competencies first. So you got to knock out English 101, 102,
I'm assuming every pilot you write is about this.
I actually have not written... I didn't think about that. I guess I should write a pilot.
That is...
They made a show already. They already made Doogie Howser. I can't do it. That's the problem. I can't do it again. It's like,
this is like the perfect sequel to Smart Guy.
It is. When Smart Guy came out, I was like, a lot of people told me that Smart Guy existed when it came out.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just need to take.
I think I'm more of a Corey in the house than a Smart Guy.
You went to college at the age 13.
Yeah. And so I wanted to do broadcasting, but then I started to make some friends in high school age, and I got into a social group because I was going to this youth group, and that was and a big 500 kids. And so that was the chance to be okay, can I do this? And so when the first 6 months I was in any kind of youth group thing, I was quiet. I didn't talk to anyone. I stood in the back. I didn't say hi. When I graduated and I left that youth group, I got carried out by a crowd chanting Greg, Greg, Greg of the graduation party. So I figured out social dynamics a little bit in that time. And I was like, oh, guess what? If you are just it's doing the show, it's performing, performing for people that makes them like you, or at least not hate who you really are. And so you hide behind that and you perform and you get popular. So then that was kind of where I started going oh, maybe it doesn't have to be on the radio. Maybe it doesn't have to be sports. Maybe I can just be the guy up there talking, and so then that kind of opened up the space for comedy. And then, you're watching Conan and I'm watching all this other, as I think you and I have talked about it before, as I was going into high school, everything I was really watching and enjoying was meta. It was shows that said, we are a television show.
Don't scroll away. You Are the Genre will be right back after the break. You Are the Genre is currently an independently produced podcast, which is Klingon for I'm the next Steve Jobs because I'm making this in my garage as a humble start to my media empire. Okay, no, it's not a garage. It's just a room in my apartment. So I typically use this space to promote stuff I'm enjoying. And, the long and winding road toward my genre involved things like selling donuts, editing videos for radio stations, and producing podcasts at places like Vice, which has been on my mind lately since the entire company and brand seems to have drifted into the sea like castles made of sand. And while Vice was by far the weirdest workplace of my career, there were a few highlights, namely the Science Solved It podcast hosted by journalist Kaylee Rogers. I had a blast collaborating with her on season 1 of that show to bring her concept of a deep dive into the world's greatest mysteries that were solved by science. I think you should listen to it now before it drifts away into the sea as well. Speaking of podcasts, podcast producer extraordinaire Rob Schulte is joining me in the next episode. He's produced podcasts for Team Coco. He produces the Doing It with Mike Sachs podcast and hosts the only podcast about Vanderpump Rules that matters in this world called Vanderpump Robs over at the Sonar Network. He's got a live show coming up March 30th, 8 p.m. at the Pack Theater in Los Angeles with Molly McAleer, who will also be a guest on You Are the Genre soon. So go to that show if you're in Los Angeles. Join host Rob Schulte, a Vanderpump Rules expert, and Molly McAleer, a pop culture aficionado, as they dissect the most bonkers pop culture news and embark on a roundtable discussion of an iconic Vanderpump Rules episode. With special guests adding their unique insights, this live podcast event promises an evening of laughter, insight, and unabashed fun. Don't miss out on the excitement as two podcasts collide in a live recording extravaganza. Speaking of collisions, okay, I don't know if that transition makes any sense, but did you know that if you become a paid subscriber to my newsletter, you can listen to new episodes of You Are the Genre a week ahead of everyone else? Well, now you do. Get more information at youarethegenre.com. gmail.com. Now, back to the episode. Where were we? This is interesting because I really wanted to be homeschooled. I think after elementary school, I think I was like begging my mom to be homeschooled. I don't remember exactly why, but probably because I just loved my alone time. But it feels like if you are homeschooled, most of the reality of other kids feels like theater. It feels absurd. It feels like it is a meta thing that you're witnessing. People go out to go to school and they have their different classes and all this stuff. Do you feel like that is a part of your entry into comedy? Because I imagine everything seemed absurd to a certain degree to you.
I think that is, as usual, Tim, you're incredibly insightful and astute. I think that is actually the core of my worldview, or how I got to it, was I was outside of regular systems. So even then, like as a little kid, I'm listening to the radio. I'm watching television shows that are saying, we're making a television show. That's the thing we're doing. So Beekman's World and the Pee Wee Herman show, Pee Wee's Playhouse, and Red Green Show, and Saturday Night Live, it's a show. And Conan is making it very clear. All of these are things where it's like, we're making a TV show. The Muppets, we're making a TV show. So it's going, oh, okay, they're not following the rules. No, they're breaking the rules and making something else. And then high school, I'm in high school at the height of high school movies. Say like that thing or not that 10 Things I Hate About You, and She's All That, and Can't Hardly Wait, and like all of these movies where it's like, this is what high school is before 9/11. This is what high school is. It's we have infinite hope. We're the children of Gen X, and we've got infinite hope. Here we go. The world's our oyster. Nothing can be bad.
Yeah,
let's
all
get
the
out of the
intros
90s.
Were always upbeat ska music. That's how
I want you to want me. Yep. And so it's so I'm watching these incredibly oversaturated kind of like fantasy parodies of what high school is in these movies, not being in high school to actually know what high school is like. And I'm hearing about high school from my friends, and it sounds horrible. I got to be honest. I would never want if my kids want to skip high school, please. It seems like it sucks. Junior high sucks. High school sucks. Why would anyone want to do that? And the people who are like, no, high school was the best, those people also usually suck. So like, I don't get the whole, high school. But I'm looking at this high school thing where it's like everything leads up to prom. There's cool kids, jocks, nerds, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And we've all got to like find a date and fall in love before blah, blah, prom, whatever. And I'm just kind of like, oh, okay, that's the pieces of high school, but I'm outside of it. So like, there becomes this irreverence, this incredulity of high school, because my friends have all these things that are so important to them. Oh, I got to get this test done. Or like, I've got to make this team and I'm like, I'm not doing any of that. And I'm fine. I'm not on a varsity team. And I'm like, not like I went and did stage crew for a play just because I asked the drama teacher, and he like had no idea what to do with like a 16-year-old that wasn't in any high school going like, hey, can I be stage crew? And he was like, yes. I was like, okay, cool. And I just did it. And then I left. And this is also, again, the 2000s where there was no security, but like just a random kid was like, I'll just work on this play. And I worked on Kiss Me Kate, and like, I was just pulling things in the back. And so that started to open this door of like, the idea of access, the idea of seeing behind the curtain, the idea that none of it's, again, like the radio show, it's all work. It's all professional. So then anytime I kind of ran into authority or a system that was presented to me, I was like, in my head, I'm like, there's a backstage here.
Yeah, you know how to subvert it. The most mind-blowing people that I knew in high school were the people who had experienced enough of the world outside of the parameters of school to see through the code of the Matrix, basically. Like, they're like, yeah. The people who could just talk to the teachers as if they're on the same level. Yeah.
And what helped me was I was in college. So it was like, you couldn't be like, oh, you're a dumb kid, or like, you're like lazy. I'm like, no, I'm beating the system.
Yeah.
So just like, what am I doing here? Explain to me why I need to be here. And so that was the idea, which is every system I came across, whether it was college, whether it was a sports thing, or whether it was like at a job that I had, or it was a political idea, all of them, what became the consistent thing that growing up like this gave me was having a spirit of being incredulous. And not cynical, not like, oh, everything's crap, blah, blah, blah. And like, not cynical, not sarcastic, not just negative, but incredulous, saying, you're going to have to get me to buy in, and I will buy in if it makes sense. But I don't buy in just because I showed up. And that's carried through so much of my life.
Yeah.
And that's from when we were at Second City, and they're like, we're at Second City and we do it this way, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay. But also, like, you know, and you're also like, yeah, but aren't you like, you're like a 35-year-old teacher who didn't get on SNL and you're mad about that. And I feel like that's impacting how you're teaching us, you know, like, but understanding like this is not the dynamic you want to have set up formally doesn't actually exist. There is always a backstage. There is always a door that I open and I go in the back, and no matter how fancy the hotel, fancy the dining room, you know, and no matter, you can go to the nicest, you go to the Four Seasons, you go to the Beverly Hilton, looks so beautiful. If you go back, it looks the same in the kitchen, every hotel.
Yeah.
Every backstage is wet, it's dirty, there's boxes, there's people smoking. That's the reality of these places. And so in all of these places, it was, look, I'm going to go back there. Don't pretend that this is the whole thing. I want to go back there where we can have a real conversation.
The more you describe this, the more I identify with it. But I feel like we tackle that scenario in different ways. I'm more like, okay, I'll pretend with you for a bit.
And for me, I'm like, I'm wasting my time. If I'm sitting out here in the audience of this system, this power dynamic, then I'm wasting my time. Why am I? What am I doing? Let's go backstage and just where the people actually make stuff, and we can sit in the back and dick around. And when we have to get on stage, we do. You know, I mean, it helps too that, like, you know, one of my friends was a touring musician in high school and college, and so I was like going to shows with him. And I was also, when I was really in youth ministry in high school, I was speaking a lot, like at different youth conferences and stuff. And so it's like 25 years ago, a totally different life. But you know, it's that thing of like, you're sitting in backstage with your friends, goofing around, like texting and watching basketball. Then it's like, I got to go talk to 3,000 people. The thing that stand-ups do. I got that idea was granted to me so early that then it just took away any kind of being awed or worried or frustrated about someone powerful. And that's helped a lot when I've had to meet famous people, because it seems like a lot of famous people that are well balanced just want to talk to you like a regular person. And so when you can come be like, hey, we both are just in this situation, then it's a lot more chill than if you're kind of freaking out. So
yeah,
it's also been made things hard because lots of powerful people don't want to be challenged in that way. And so when they're like, no, I'm going to get someone easier to do this. And then you leave.
And then you hire Tim. No.
Right.
So
then you hire the guy whose mom was in the Defense Department and got him a job.
What we're talking about, it's kind of like the stories of like gods who dabble in human affairs, or aliens who are in human skin, confused. And those plots where you're just explaining things we all take for granted, but are strange from a different perspective. That feeling influenced my comedy style, where I felt like I'm sort of an alien who landed in a black person's skin, and now I'm exploring that on stage for all of your entertainment.
Would you say that you're a brother from another planet?
Yes, that's actually my autobiography.
That's great movie.
Yeah. How did that stuff flow into your comedy endeavors?
Yeah, I think it really is the through line of my work, and if I grow into any kind of person that people like, you know, Jordan Peele has a voice. People have these voices. Like Cord Jefferson's first movie came out. It's incredible. You know, like that. He has a voice. Like all these people have these voices. And so for me, it's like this hope that what comes out about my voice is that kind of incredulousness. Probably the most obvious version of it is doing political comedy, which is that like there's so much stuff, especially, you know, you and I both write and wrote political comedy during the Trump era. And the thing is, and I think this is also exacerbated and rooted in being a Black American as well, you know, because see the movie Get Out for explanation. But the idea that like people were like, Trump is bad, so the other side is good. And the incredulous thing is like, whoa, yeah. Trump is bad. That's the end of the sentence. That's enough. That part is enough that we could all get mad and we could try to fix it. Yeah. But the part where you're like, no, and that means this is great over here. And you're like, whoa. And so for me, that became a thing, even in my first job, like getting told like, you shouldn't be pitching Nancy Pelosi jokes, and being like, but this person has done bad things and has bad ideas. So isn't that the job? And it being like, that's not the job. And then going, oh, okay, that's the conflict I have here, which is that I'm happy to take shots at anyone. And here's the thing. I don't want this to get clipped out of context and it be like me doing some kind of Tucker rant where I'm like, I'll tell you the truth. No one else will tell you. No, it's that I am mad at everyone because everyone is so bad at what they're doing. If they were good, I wouldn't just go at them to go at them. But they're so bad. And so, especially like if you're black, they're so bad and it's really frustrating. So that kind of incredulousness of like, I'm going to talk about that Joe Biden is a bad president. And that doesn't mean I think Donald Trump should be president. I just think it's okay to say one option is a fascist and the other one is a really bad option of an old guy who's friends with segregationists and his brain is melting and he's closing down the border the same way Trump did. So he kind of sucks. And the other option is hell on earth. That doesn't make one of them good. It means I can say they both suck. But there's a dichotomy out there where it's like in all things, it has to be like, this is bad, which means this is good. Or I have to appease the audience, like, because I want the audience to feel good at home at the end of the piece is what a lot of shows are built on. If I ever get a show, one of the reasons it will be canceled very soon is that I'm like, I don't care if the audience feels good. I care if the audience, we're talking about something that's actually true. Let's talk about reality and make fun of it. And at the end of the day, we can all feel uncomfortable about it because that's how people of color feel every day. So in political comedy, it's very simple, but I try to be like that outside of just political comedy because I am obsessed with subverting tropes. And that's because like that to me becomes that thing of like, oh, people say like, oh, wrote a pilot about this married couple in New York City, very like, I could say it's like Mad About You for millennials. And people were like, well, why? What's the conflict between the married couple? And I'm like, there isn't one. Some marriages are good. Did you know that? And I don't know if you know this. If you live in New York City, there's going to be a lot of conflict because it's New York City, but those things of where you're told, oh, it has to go like this, like even like my obsession with dismantling and exposing the hero's journey as white supremacy and colonialism, like is the idea that it's like, no, this is how we do it. And then you hear these people who just eat this stuff up and they're like, one powerful person told me it goes like this, so I believe them. And that lack of that credulity blows my mind. Because I'm like, did you ask any questions? Did you poke around at all and look at this? I mean, it's how we all felt in 2016 when people were posting stuff on Facebook that was so fake. And you were like, what are you guys doing? Is anyone looking at what they're thinking? And that goes into everything, even with sketch comedy and with like that stuff. I always want to say, like, what is everyone doing? What always has to happen? What does everyone do? What do they automatically do? And how can I break that and not do that? And that ties all the way back to sketch comedy, SNL, but to Conan. And I think essentially it's because one of the major ingredients in the incredulity sauce that is my voice, to triple mix metaphors, is Dadaism. Because, Letterman and Conan both embrace this artistic philosophy of deconstruction and analysis of the form itself. And that's always been so interesting. Conan, one of the things that made Conan so fascinating is that he isn't just doing a late night show and saying he's doing a late night show. His late night show is about making a late night show. Yeah. And that, like, Larry Sanders show, like these are shows that but it's going by breaking it, Letterman, by breaking it, I'm commenting on what it is. And that to me is so interesting and fun and entertaining because by doing that, I can then show people who love that thing where it's broken and and why they should have been asking more questions.
I always think about like the simple, strange, nuanced things. I don't think of like a big splashy thing that Letterman did or a big splashy thing that Conan did. But when I think about how they broke the form or just like tip the hat that you are watching television, for Letterman, it's tossing a pin off and you hear the sound of a window cracking. For Conan, who was a huge discovery for me, like the two great television discoveries for me were the Power Rangers and Conan. I feel like the camera was always so stiffly on him during the monologue. So it felt like he was trapped in the television. And so when he played with the form by the camera not moving, but he moves below it, and now his hair is like a shark moving across the screen, it was that type of stuff that exactly what you're talking about, like reminding you that you are watching something that isn't even attempting to be reality the way so many other shows do. But you finally got to this point where you're literally behind the magic curtain on the other side of the television, on the other side of the radio. Was this your Wizard of Oz moment?
Well, I think I think that's the thing is, for me, you're looking at the Wizard of Oz going, there's got to be a little guy back there. Does anyone else think there's a little guy back there? This can't be the guy. This can't be the guy. And so then you go back and you see the little guy. You're like, I could be the little guy.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. So then you're back there like, yeah, now I'm the little guy. And I guess that's the part that I think is like, that's where I feel like I belong. The kind of what I do and what I'm good at is about being behind that curtain going like, yeah, we make the big Oz head move. Okay. Like, that's kind of like that's what we do. It's, I think about like what you're talking about with Conan and the camera. It's not like when late night is being sublime is when the host is reminding the in-studio audience that they're watching him make a show for a camera. He's not playing to them. That can't, the head bit and the cutting off and all that stuff, that's going, you're going to watch me talk to the camera because the camera is the thing, because it's a show going out to them. So the audience can be there. But for me with late night, it's like, I don't ever want to play to the audience in the room. The audience is observing and laughing as we do a show to 2 million people through a piece of glass, And so that, like, to always break reality, always change the ground that you're standing on. And for me, I think it becomes a perpetual challenge where I want to make sure that in all the things I'm making and writing, I talk about it with friends as like cutting against yourself. Like, you always want to cut at your ankles. Like, there should always be points in your political monologue script where you go, what if I'm full of crap? I might be full of, and you might be saying you're wrong. That's possible. This part is kind of me guessing, you want to admit, because the surety is is the enemy of incredulity when people are so sure. So you're asking questions even of yourself.
And it's when it stops being comedy too. It's like when comedy becomes a speech practically.
Yes. And I think there's a smart fine line because, we've had to do, when you have to do that really political comedy and you're talking about something serious, whatever, and you realize you've lost the comedy because you're not preaching, but you're making a point. You're making a humorous point, but you can't, the comedy's gone because you've had to be so like, this matters. And then there's the bail out the other direction where people say, none of it matters. Who cares? Whatever. Here's what's going on. Well, nobody cares. And I think the sweet spot is actually in the middle where you're going, this really sucks. I cannot impact it at all. So my job here, audience, is not going to be to fix it or explain it to you. It's going to be to do comedy about the thing. And that's, I think, when you hit the sweet spot is when you stop thinking that you are going to change the world or change minds or hearts or make dictators resign. And you go, all I'm doing is going, hey, you guys know that bad thing? I thought of some stuff that might make us laugh about it.
Well, I feel like we've effectively charted your path towards being the genre. But with all this talk about being obsessed with the meta of it all, it feels like there's a lot of space for you to maybe lose yourself. And in the industry, especially these past few years in my own life, because so much of comedy and this idea of making it and all these ladders you have to climb, there's a lot of ego involved. And when that ego gets bruised by one reason or another, it becomes really tricky waters. And when you're interested in multiple things, especially in a meta sense, it feels like there are infinite ways for you to lose yourself. So I think the listeners and myself would love to know, how you navigate that sensation and what you do to keep yourself grounded through it all.
The biggest benefit I have is that I've got a great family. So, my wife, my kids, and friends in comedy who, like I talked about with being on the radio as a kid, there's that moment where it clicks on and you're on air, and there's a moment where they hang up and you're done. And it's making sure that monologue version of myself, the comedy person, the subversive, like that person, I might have kernels of ideas in my regular life that get me to open the notes app. I might have things that bug me where I go, why aren't we asking questions about this? And that sparks something. But the version of that goes out to people is a on-off experience. The camera's on, the camera's off. I'm on stage, I'm not on stage. So what helps is that like that's the even like right now in this podcast, it's like that's Greg who is speaking into a recording device somewhere. Greg.
Yeah.
And then when it clicks off, I'm like, Greg, dad, husband, writer, guy who has to take the trash out, and it just draws you back to like, oh, this is my real life. That's not going to stop for anything. So that really helps me stay grounded. I'm sure if I had no kids and no wife, I could be like grinding stand up and doing a bunch more stuff for my career, but I would not have a home base that made me make sure that as a person, I was going to stay in a good spot.
Yeah, it feels like the sweet spot that a lot of people in the creative world should set their mind to. And I feel like some of us don't, and the lucky ones of us learn that, but realizing that both ends of those sides of the curtain balance the other out. Like you get your ego out of the way by doing something fun and creative and making people laugh or making a great piece of art or whatever. And then you go home and that makes you appreciate the little things that you're doing. The greatest feelings in the world are those brief moments where both of those sides of the curtain are on even water on both sides. And when it swings the other way, that's where it gets difficult.
I mean, speaking of backstage, I think that that's the real place where you find balance, where I want the work to be in front of the curtain and me to be behind the curtain. Because then people interact with the work, they care about the work, they like it, they don't. And I'm sitting in the back watching basketball, texting with my friends. And that to me is the perfect balance. I'm back here, it's out here. And that curtain divides it. And so then I get to go home at the end and be like, cool, that's great.
Wait a minute, Greg, are you saying that you want to make an AI version of yourself that acts on screen?
No, I want to make a full robot. I want it to be a straight up robot.
Do you not know what you were fighting for in this WGA strike?
Hey, I don't want AI, but this isn't AI. Nobody said anything about robot duplicates. We didn't fight a strike for duplicates. Not computer generated duplicates. Real robot on set. Doing my moves.
I feel like you just put a magnifying glass on the biggest loophole that no one talked about in the contract.
If they can build life model decoys, let's go. I'll see them in 2026 when we negotiate that. You have to use organic oil in my decoy. I've lost my mind now. We've talked long enough. I've lost it.
But clearly this was Walt Disney's plan all along with all those animatronics.
Yeah.
This is where he wanted to,
This is where his head's going. Right on the life model decoy. Then he's back. Hey guys, do you like the 1950s?
Do you want more from Greg Iwinski? I think maybe just look up his IMDb every now and then. Freddie Nunez created and sings the You Are the Genre theme song, and Adam Smith produced it. Podcast producer and host Rob Schulte joins me next episode, but if you become a paid subscriber to my newsletter, you can listen to it a week ahead of the normies. This is Tim Barnes signing off with your weekly reminder that you are the genre.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do. I'd like to know the things that specifically